Life's like a box of chocolates. You never quite know what you're going to get. Nowhere is this truer than in fiction. From the classic Clark Kent and Superman dichotomy, to My Hero Academia's Shoto Todoroki learning to overcome his painful past and embrace both sides of his power and heritage to realize his potential as a hero. The cards life deals us can cause personal conflict, and how we choose to play them is what defines who we are. Enter Lyndis, Lady of Kaelin and Nomad of Psyche, a shining example. The Lady of the Plains, the Noblewoman of Psyche, the Chun-Li of FE. Whatever you call her, Lynn's one of Fire Emblem's most iconic characters. As the first Lord of the West, and many new players' first crush, Lynn means a lot to the culture, which has been leaned on pretty heavily, like in Heroes and Warriors and Heroes and Smash and Heroes and Heroes and Heroes and...
Are you done? Are you done?
Even so, several factors somewhat muddle Lynn's perception within the core community, kind of like Lucina, my first deep dive. And just like Lucina, today I'll be giving my full perspective on Lynn and her value to Blazing Blade, with a focus on her balanced and dualistic personality, and the conflicting identities in her character. Lynn's a lord like no other. Her journey is one of self-discovery and fulfillment, of finding her place in a world that won't accept her. It's the story of a young foreigner trying to stake her claim on life however she can. But even more, it's the path of a brave, kind young woman who gives her all for her loved ones, for better or worse. Lynn's intimately personal character arc and direct but nuanced personality have made her one of my favourite Fire Emblem characters. So kick back and relax while I tell you all about why. For those who need it, let's kick off with a quick dive into Lynn's place in Blazing Blade's plot. Lynn is a nomad from the Lorca tribe. Born as Lyndis to her noble mother Madeline and tribe chieftain Hassar, Lynn lived with her fellow tribespeople on the open plains of Psyche. But everything changed when the Talava bandits attacked. They poisoned the Lorca's water and ambushed them in the night, murdering almost the entire tribe, including Lynn's parents, Lynn herself being one of less than 10 to survive. Lynn tried to remain with her fellow survivors, but that was thrown out the window when they all refused to follow her on the grounds of her gender and abandoned her when she chose to stay. It seems feminism is just a word here. Orphaned and abandoned, Lynn lived out this unplanned solitary confinement for 6 months, until one day discovering a tactician lying unconscious outside. Knowing there are better places to take a nap than on the ground, Lynn nursed him back to health at her place, tagging along with them after they recovered, with hopes of becoming a peerless warrior and seeking vengeance on her tribe's murderers. After palling around with Proto-Robin for a bit, Lynn meets a pair of knights called Sane and Kent in Bulgar, and learns of her true heritage as the granddaughter of Lord Horzin, the Marquess of Kaelin, revealing her true identity as Lady Lyndis, the noble Lady of Kaelin. And with that bombshell dropped on her head, Lynn switches course from seeking vengeance to seeking out her long-lost grandfather, with Mario and Luigi over here helping her out. She gains more companions along the way, including her gal pal Florina, fellow Psychean nomad Raph, and this dude. She finds out this prick, her great-uncle Lundgren, is trying to poison her grandfather and get her whacked so he can move in on the Kaelin throne. She also meets a boy called Nils and helps him try to save his older sister Ninian from some thugs. This crosses her path with the young noble of Foray and main protagonist of the game, Eliwood, who saved Ninian during the battle. Lynn explains her sitch to Eliwood, and Eliwood, gent that he is, helps her secure a clear path to Castle Kaelin, where Lynn takes out her tosser of a great uncle, with a pretty dope line to boot, and finally unites with her grandfather. She finds him at death's door from the poison, but the motivation of finally meeting his granddaughter helps him pull through, though he's still affected to the point that Lynn must take on a lot of his duties as a noble. Fast forward a year, and Eliwood and Lynn's paths would cross again, as Lynn fights to defend her new home in Castle Kaelin from an invading force from Laos. With Eliwood and his boy Hector's forces behind her, Lynn reclaims the castle, and she joins their group when she hears of Eliwood's quest to find his father Elbert, combining her forces with theirs and turning Eliwood and Hector's lord duo into a power trio. She's a permanent fixture from there, as they look for Elbert, battle the Black Fang, a band of assassins after Eliwood and his father, and deal with the game's big bad Nurgle, who seeks the power to open the Dragon's Gate and control the dragons within, risking all of Alib in the process. After the events of the game, Lynn can entrust Kaelin to Ostia and set out for Psyche alone, or with Raph, Kent or Florina, She can also marry Hector or Eliwood, in which case she'll return to their homeland with them.
Glad to talk. It's nice to get what's on our minds out there in the open.
To start, I want to address a couple of misconceptions I've seen concerning Lynn's personality. Namely, her supposed infatuation with the Avatar, taking up most of her character, and her being this bland, doe-eyed cheerleader who's just there to be the player's waifu.
I was having a dream, and in that dream, you saved me. You're special to me. That feeling has been building for a long time. It crept up on me.
Lynn basically stops interacting with Mark after her story ends. Honestly, Hector and Eliwood aren't far behind in their modes. There is a companionship between the two of you, she's your peerless warrior, and you, her master strategist. But there isn't the subtext heroes might imply, and she's not the dainty or doe-eyed doll that heroes might have you believe. No, while kind and generous, Lynn's a tough young woman, with a bit of a hot streak to her, and a chip on her shoulder to boot. It may shock you that the fanservice-based gacha game doesn't nail a character, even after 5 tries, but there you go. For clarity, let's take Lynn's personality from the ground up. The game describes Lynn as stout-hearted and kind. Along with her iron will and sense of pride, this mostly defines her personality. That's bolstered by her strong sense of justice and devotion, the latter showing clearest in her relationship with Florina. We see early in Lynn mode that Florina is...
I don't know. There's no good word. Shy?
Exactly. And as her support chain reveals, kinda scatterbrained. While not exactly helpless per se, she lacks the fortitude to properly care for herself, and as a result, tends to rely on her older sisters. Unsurprisingly, this extends to her and Lynn's relationship. We learn in their B support that Lynn's been looking out for her since they were kids, and we see Lynn almost mothering her in their C support, as Florina nervously fumbles through her equipment checks, and Lynn says it's chill because she's got her back. Even though at this point, Lynn is literally paying Florina to protect her. Wish my boss was that nice. To her credit, Florina says she wants to change that and not have Lynn protect her anymore, but Lynn is totally cool with it. She's just buzzed to be with her girlfriend, which, while sweet, belies a tinge of malaise. Lynn going sicko mode to take care of Florina may well be her making up for her past loss by protecting her remaining loved ones. In the end, the two reaffirm their relationship and decide to leave for Sake when the fighting's over. Small as it may seem, I really appreciate Lynn's attitude here. Their rather sweet support shows how big Lynn's heart is and how close she and Florina clearly are. And this caring isn't exclusive to Florina. She's almost motherly to Will in their support, encouraging him to write home to his family when he was stymied by the shame of not striking rich like he wanted. Lynn's emotional intelligence allows her to understand both Will's plight and how his parents must feel as well, ultimately helping him realise they'd much rather see him than his cash. Lynn's also highly empathetic, to the point of sharing her friends' emotions as if they were her own, shown by her relationship with Eliwood and Hector. Lynn has nothing forcing her to join Eliwood and stick her own neck out. She could easily let him go off and chill out with the grandfather she fought so hard to find. Instead, she puts that to one side and chooses to join him. Why? To protect Horsen, feeling she owes Eliwood for his previous help, but most importantly, she considers Eliwood a friend at this point, and wants to spare him the experience of losing a father like she did, looking past her own pain to save a friend from sharing it. As for Hector, she develops a low-key understanding of his emotions during his story, and we'll touch on where that leads a bit later. Lynn's empathy and devotion are best shown if she attacks Nergal in the final level, where she straight up spells it out. The nomads of the plains do not abandon their fellow tribespeople. Eliwood and Hector are my dear friends. Their sorrow is my sorrow. Their anger is my anger. Nergal. In my friends' names, I will cut you down. This not technically being Lynn's fight is irrelevant. Eliwood and Hector are her boys, and if they're getting into a scrap, best believe she's gonna throw hands too. Speaking of those two, it's interesting how Lynn slots into their roughly decade-long bromance pretty seamlessly, perhaps in part due to the similarities in their values and demeanour. Like Eliwood and Hector, Lynn's informal with her friends and subordinates, preferring to be addressed by her nickname Lynn rather than her full name, Lyndis. This makes up part of her Florina support, where she actively pushes Florina to not treat her as her lady or her liege, but as her friend. And she shows genuine regret over her title in her support with Kent, which concerns Lynn's desire for Kent to be there for her and not her station. It's worth noting she specifically requests he call her Lynn in their A support. Having grown up known as Lynn and still being new to this world of titles and formality, her grasping at the familiar in little ways like that makes sense. Lynn's aware of, and uncomfortable with, the distance her noble status puts between her and those she would be close to. More positively, it also shows that she cares far more about people and relationships than titles. She saved Kaelin, but as opposed to a lust for power or greed like Lundgren, Lynn just wanted to meet her grandpa and give Lundgren the hand. Lynn's driven by her big heart. Her sense of justice and devotion guide her actions, and with a potential exception we'll touch on later, she acts off that without hesitation. And yet, that's not all. Lynn's not some bubble-headed plains girl who wants to do her best and help people. Lynn's fond of swordplay and sparring, and doesn't suffer fools gladly, which I think Sane would agree with. More pertinent, though, is her vengefulness. Lynn won't hesitate to deal with
the enemy!
Or those who harm her friends and family. This is where a darker side of her comes into play, and we see the duality in her personality. I mentioned the chip on Lynn's shoulder, but also her sense of justice and devotion. These boons can quite easily spin out into vengefulness when Lynn is crossed, especially concerning the Talva bandits. When it comes to these guys, Lynn can get downright vicious, shown early in her story when she passes through the Talva territory. They're soulless beasts. I will never forgive them. Never. I am not running away. I will be back. Someday. I'll be stronger. I will break their swords beneath me like twigs beneath a stallion's hooves. I will avenge my people. I'll do everything in my power. This totally justified thirst for revenge shows Lynn at her most intense, and is discussed in her support with Wallace. In their B support, Lynn reveals to him that she's still chasing her goal of vengeance on the Talva bandits. Wallace remarks on how upset Lord Horson would be if he knew that his granddaughter, a lady of Kaelin, was plotting revenge, but Lynn asserts that she can't just forget what they did to her parents. Wallace asks if she hates them. Lynn says yes, and that while they live, she can't move on. Here, we see that vengefulness I mentioned earlier. While kind-hearted, Lynn's not like Eliwood, who's compassionate and emotionally stable to the point that he's completely above hating Nurgle at the end of the game, even after everything Nurgle's done. Lynn's no paragon and can't help the natural desire for revenge, which lingers, festers, and threatens to cut her off from her own happiness, the folly of revenge. Unlike Ike, who canonically gets to face off against and defeat the Black Knight twice within the Tellius narrative, Lynn's thirst for vengeance isn't facilitated by her game, or more specifically, by Wallace, who in the Ray support reveals he went after the Talva bandits himself and kill stole her. Do not play Call of Duty with this man. Lynn understandably flips, but Wallace claims he did it to give Lynn a chance to be happy, explaining that while the hatred Lynn held in her heart gave her the strength to survive her time on the plains, if left unchecked, it can twist and consume her, as Wallace puts it. He really twists the knife in when he asks if her parents would want this from her.
That pillow belt.
Wallace is pretty much on the money here, but what I really like about this is that Lynn doesn't just accept it and drop her grudge on the spot. She's left wanting for words, but she clearly hasn't let go yet. Wallace accepts that his words will need time to sink in, if they ever do. I've seen criticism of Lynn's reaction here as unreasonable or naive, but I feel that misses the point of both the scene and Lynn's entire intention. It can't be overstated. Everyone Lynn knew and loved was either slaughtered by bandits or straight up abandoned her 6 months before the game starts. To call Lynn heavily traumatized is an understatement. Trauma can be processed in a myriad of ways, and for Lynn, it manifests as seeking retribution. The Talva bandits stole Lynn's life from her, and now she wants their necks. I don't know about you, but I can see where she's coming from. She's not naive, she's hurt beyond belief, and she's angry, which is why she snaps at Wallace. She sought the catharsis of revenge by her own hand, and Wallace snatched that away when it wasn't really his place. You could even see it as desperation. As Lynn herself says, as long as they live, she can't move on. It's the bitter culmination of her sense of justice and devotion, and frankly, I don't blame her. I find it interesting and humanizing to see how Lynn's love for the people around her, typically a virtue, can become genuinely toxic to her when threatened. The impulse to avenge her lost loved ones rings almost as strong in Lynn as the instinct to protect them in the first place. This is low-key one of her most defining characteristics. She spent a good half-year stewing alone on the plains, presumably training to claim her revenge. When her story starts, her life goal is nothing more than getting that revenge. While she's all smiles in the CG that you meet her in, inside, she's already been consumed by her righteous anger. Wallace notes that her rage is part of what makes her so strong, however, it's both a poison and a blinder. When trying to get from Baden to the Dread Isle to rescue Albert, the group find that only pirates would be willing to make the perilous journey. Lynn immediately rejects accepting help from pirates, and when Eliwood and Hector decide to go for it, she gets upset and leaves to find another solution in town. While perhaps a little myopic, this is understandable considering both the fact that these are pirates and this isn't One Piece, and Lynn's past trauma. As Eliwood explains, pirates are basically just sea-based bandits to Lynn, and she can't help equating them to her parents' killers. The deaths of Lynn's parents haven't been forgotten, even though she's on this new journey, and the lingering pain of that still affects Lynn's mindset from time to time, even after her story ends. She comes around once Captain Fargus starts his trial though, which just illustrates that her devotion to her friends outweighs her vengefulness in the end. She even acknowledges painting all pirates as bad people isn't quite fair later, displaying open-mindedness and willingness to change. As you can see, behind Lynn's kind-hearted, serene visage hides a bite of steel. She also harbours a degree of insecurity, particularly in terms of how she's perceived. A subtly recurring trait of Lynn's is her emphasis on strength. If A-supported with Wrath or Eliwood, she recognises and is attracted to their strength, and she's offended when she feels Hector slights her strength in their C support. Like Hector, Lynn's sensitive to being perceived as weak. I imagine weakness implies an inability to protect for Lynn, and perhaps takes her back to the helplessness of the night of her parents' murder. This feeling of inutility pushes Lynn to prove herself. Hector's little bumble has her challenge him to a duel. One look at their stats will probably tell you how that worked out. Lynn takes the loss pretty hard, and is shown practicing in their B support, worrying that she may be a burden to Eliwood and Hector as she is. It seems Lynn sees her sword as her only real contribution, which of course isn't true. There's also her allies from Lynn mode, and the fact that she's able to recruit several new units in Eliwood and Hector mode, plus her tracking down the Black Fang's fortress with her superior hunting skills, something no one else had, not to mention what she does for Hector himself emotionally, which we'll get into a little later. Lynn's emphasis on strength may seem driven by simple pride, but there's also her desire to protect, her almost maternal instinct to support who she cares about. This includes the dark side of this instinct, as Lynn seeks strength in her pursuit of vengeance, which she admits to when we meet her. Being weak also means Lynn being unable to achieve her goal of vengeance. This makes it twice as much of a sore spot for her, which I imagine is part of why she's so touchy about it with Hector. Interestingly, this becomes conflated with Lynn's gender, as she takes special umbrage to being slighted for being a woman, which of course makes perfect sense given that it literally got her abandoned, and is a pretty poor thing to do in general, but it can cause her to misconstrue and unfairly lash out at the people close to her, or just Hector. You may have noticed much of how I've described Lynn, vengefulness aside, is with terms typically associated with female characters, and indeed, Lynn possesses many conventionally feminine traits. Her nurturing nature, empathy, and devotion to her loved ones especially stand out. Lynn presents these traits pretty uniquely for her time, being more headstrong and having a slightly spikier outlook than perhaps you might expect. I appreciate that she's perfectly comfortable with possessing these traits, but isn't tied down into stereotypical female character territory, which, as Rising Sunfish, and That's Wannabe Cats point out, wasn't so common at the time of FE7's release. Shout out to you two. They both express Lynn's humanization by the game, and I agree. Lynn's shown to be strongly in touch with her emotions without being melodramatic about it, and I love the balance here. She emphasizes strength, but doesn't take it as reneging on her emotions like Hector, or compartmentalizing like Eliwood must, or eschewing her femininity, which she shows during the pirate ship level. On the way to Valor, Lynn struggles with being surrounded by a gang of pirates. Hector finds her struggling, and while they talk, he reveals to Lynn that Eliwood told him of the Talaver bandits murdering her parents, and says the pirates here seem to be better men, trying to help her mentally separate the two parties. Lynn responds by detailing the night of her parents' murder, revealing it wasn't just them, but her whole tribe. As she does, she vividly recalls the horrors of that night, eventually breaking down in tears. Hector turns away, thinking a strong woman like Lynn wouldn't want to be seen crying, but Lyn scolds him for thinking that way, rejecting the idea of crying being weakness. Hector goes on to say that when his parents died, he couldn't cry in front of others, not wanting to appear weak, but even when he was alone, he found he still couldn't, wanting to but being physically unable to get it out. The mask of iron he was wearing now welded to his heart. Lyn tries to talk it out, but they're interrupted by the Black Fang. The crux of this unfinished conversation is the difference in how they process their emotions. Where Hector buries them deep and ignores them to be a pillar of strength for everyone, Lyn embraces them and lets them take their course, letting them fuel and motivate her. It's clear Hector's method isn't the healthiest, as he's emotionally out of touch with himself. Lyn's way isn't perfect either though, given that she becomes a revenge-obsessed hermit for half a year. Their social context explains this contrast. Lyn's a tribeswoman, a nomad with a strong sense of freedom and spirituality. As she says,
I grew up on the plains, so I'm pretty direct.
By contrast, Hector is the pampered but pressured young lord of the most prominent march of his country, and one already known as kind of a screw-up. Resultantly, Lyn allows her emotions to flow free, while Hector bottles them up. The difference in how they process their emotions reflects the contrasting shapes of their lives. This dichotomy goes on to be rather important to Hector's development. It's brought back around in the final chapter of Hector Mode of Lyn and Hector A support. At this point, Hector's found out about his brother Uther's passing and is struggling with the grief of it, especially because he wasn't able to be there for him because he was too busy helping Eliwood, adding a scoop of guilt into the mix. Lyn finds out about this from Eliwood, and also that Hector had been pretending nothing was wrong so as to not worry them. If Lyn and Hector are A-supported, Lyn finds Hector, and, understanding him well enough to know that he won't have been able to process his own grief, leans on his shoulder and cries for him, calling this his share of tears. Hector's allowing Lyn to do this symbolizes Hector finally accepting his emotions and letting people in, with Lyn's empathy, emotional intelligence, and open heart being the final motivator for his development. It's a great moment for them both that brings their conversation about dealing with their grief full circle, and displays one of Lyn's best qualities. Lyn knows how to use her big heart to help the people she loves. Forget the Manikati, forget her speed growth, that may be her greatest strength. She's rather magnetic and charismatic overall, even with the pain she endures, and the difficult situations she finds herself in, which we'll get to. Lyn's charm, kindness and honesty remain. For better or worse, her personality balances passion, compassion, and pride, and I appreciate her for that.
How I long to be on the open plains, the feeling of the wind.
When discussing Lyn, insofar as the story, things get quite interesting. While taking a back seat in Eliwood and Hector mode, Lyn notably impacts the plot in subtle ways. Her most obvious contributions being her tracking down the Black Fang's fortress like I mentioned earlier, and her connection to Ninian and Nils, key characters to the game's story. She first meets them in her mode, and that's revisited in the pirate ship level, when Ninian is washed up onto Fargus's ship. Lyn carries her aboard, and after the party defends her from the men who were chasing her earlier, Lyn makes sure she joins the party instead of them leaving her behind, figuring out that the men who'd been chasing her in Lyn mode were the Black Fang, and that they needed to keep her close and protect her. Ninian's presence is crucial to the game's plot, and low-key, same for Nils, giving Lyn a large indirect role in the story. Lyn acts as a bridge between those two and the rest of the party, which is microcosmic of a trait she carries throughout the game. Hear me out. Lyn's the only lord that can unconditionally promote with a Heaven Seal once they're available, and she has the highest number of unconditional talk recruitments across FE7's lords as well. Generally, I get the feeling the developers used her as a kind of unifying presence within the gameplay. This carries over into the game's narrative and social structure, so to speak. Lyn connects Ninian and Nils to the party, but let's go deeper. Lyn mode introduces many characters who'll be brought back into the fold in Eliwood and Hector mode. This is a good way to introduce the player to the cast and different gameplay classes, but it also has Lyn become familiar with a lot of faces from very early on, alongside the player. Through this, Lyn becomes a bridge between the player and the cast, and a bridge between the cast itself, Lyndis' Legion being a perfect example. Argue her presence in the plot if you must, but Lyn is heavily involved in the cast, having, or being able to form, connections across the entire cast. From her Florina, to Sane and Kent, Urk and Sarah, to Ninian and Nils, Hector's man Matthew, and the otherwise Lone Ranger, Raph, not to mention would-be defectors Heath, Lago and Nino, and even goddamn psychopaths like Corel, and of course, Eliwood and Hector themselves. Oh, and this dude. All these connections not only highlight Lyn's charisma that I gushed over earlier, but ties her to the plot and the world of Alib in these strong but subtle ways that make her feel involved without upstaging the boys in their modes, or throwing up the question of why she's never mentioned in Binding Blade. In a character-driven game like Blazing Blade, this involvement makes perfect sense, but hold that thought. For now, let's discuss Lynn's character itself. Lynn's character arc contrasts both Eliwood's and Hector's. Eliwood's flat character arc shows him reaffirming his moral values and overcoming his hardship to save Alib, while Hector's positive character arc centers around him overcoming his personal flaws and insecurities to grow into a leader. Just like her story compared to theirs, Lynn's is less influenced by the main plot and more rooted in her own being. Something fascinating about Lynn that I've never really seen discussed is her varied motivation. Her character goals start simply enough, but meeting and interacting with other characters and reacting to new revelations in the plot causes it to change multiple times and grow multifaceted as a result. Vengeance, family, belonging, strength, justice, protection. Lynn seeks all this out during the game. You can see how wildly spread out these goals are, and Lynn stretches to achieve them all. While Eliwood and Hector's arcs center around them becoming heroes and rulers and saving the day, Lynn's is far humbler, being mostly about finding her place in the world. You see, I consider Lynn lost during her mode, and perhaps even longer. I see her personal journey as having two distinct phases, split by the time skip between Lynn mode and Eliwood and Hector mode. Lynn's mode shows her seeking. Her story starts with her seeking power to avenge her people, motivated by pain and anger, but the news of her grandfather changes that. Learning she still has at least one family member left to cherish and protect changes Lynn's mindset, and her path changes course from seeking power for revenge to seeking family and belonging. As she puts it, he's the only family she has left, and she wants him to live a long, happy life. This motivation is the narrative heart of Lynn mode. By Eliwood and Hector mode, Lynn's achieved her goal of finding Whoreson, and while she's still trying to catch a body low-key, now her character is based less around that, and more around helping Eliwood achieve his own seeking of his father and bringing Nurgle to justice, as well as protecting all the precious things that she's found, the friends she made during her mode. And Hector. Her grandfather, her new land, and with it, a whole new flock of people to protect. This shows subtle progression in Lynn's character, and I think she benefits from the time skip because of it. While her pain and desire for revenge aren't gone entirely, Lynn's begun to shift gears and walk the path to a bright future. Her new goal is shown when we first see her protecting Castle Caelin and Lord Whoreson. This symbolises her new motivation to protect, and that's extended when she joins the party to aid Eliwood and Hector and keep them safe. Of course, it's not all peaches and roses. Lynn still harbours a feeling that she doesn't
belong in this world.
Largely born from her attachment to psyche. A hotly debated question in Lynn's character is, where does she belong? In the same way that a goal as a character is multifaceted, thanks to Blazing Blade's multiple character endings, that question has several answers. And honestly, I think they all totally make sense and are pretty good outcomes. The biggest takeaway is what this means. Through her actions and the relationships she's made, Lynn finds several places she can belong and many people who come to accept and love her. Slightly corny perhaps, but I find it genuinely charming. Lynn was a girl who had everything taken away from her at the drop of a hat, and faces many struggles just trying to reacclimatize. Confronted by a world that spits in her face, Lynn finds the strength to smile back. She carries on and keeps moving, letting herself build new bonds and putting her body on the line to protect them, even when she doesn't have to. And no matter what path she goes down, her heart and fortitude are rewarded. That said, let's talk about some of these answers. Lynn's consistently characterized as a fiercely proud Psychean, shown by how she handles her meeting with the Marquis Arafin during her story. Even though she was relying on his help to get to Castle Caelin at the time, when he disparages her race, calling her a nomadic mongrel,
"Fuck you, motherfucker!"
she throws that back in his face and dips out, having no time for anyone dissing her people. That's one of Lynn's strongest character beats. As Arafin notes, if Lynn had just swallowed her pride and cried for his help like he wanted, he would have given her the help she needed, and she would have been able to steamroll Lundgren much earlier, effectively ending her story and struggle right there and then. But Lynn's pride as a Psychean, especially one of the last Lorca, won't allow this, and ultimately she stands by that. While admittedly a logically questionable move, the scene's framed in such a way that makes it very clear why Lynn's doing what she is, and as a result, I'm on her side anyway. This scene serves as a reminder that everything Lyn does, she does on her own terms, especially in Lyn mode, which is very much a personal journey. Ultimately, her pride isn't framed as correct per se, it's just Lyn staying true. However, this pride starts to falter later, as Lyn struggles to settle into her role as a lady during the time skip. While not exactly savage, Lyn lacks in etiquette and finds it hard to pick up, which is discussed in her B support with Eliwood. That's not the only trouble she faces there, as she asks Eliwood if he knows of any other female lordlings their age, hoping to make some friends. Eliwood says yes, but when Lyn asks if any are into sparring or weaponry, she finds they're not exactly kindred spirits. While Lyn does have many conventionally feminine traits, her headstrong and unrefined nature, her more outdoorsy and somewhat tomboyish tastes, and her foreignness puts her out of sorts with the expectation of Lycian ladies. Too much of a woman for her tribe, not enough of a lady for the nobles. Talk about a rock and a hard place. This, along with Lyn's difficulty with etiquette, makes her show regret over her Sacaean heritage for the first and only time in the game.
My grandfather must be vexed to have me as a grandchild. My late mother was gentle, well-mannered, and beautiful. Yes, but I've so far to go. I'm not like a lady at all. My grandfather took me in, a mixed-blood child, but I fear the other nobles of Lycia will not be so accepting. I do not want the sake blood in my veins to bring my grandfather shame.
Of note here is that Lyn doesn't just show regret over her Sacaean heritage, but doubts herself as a person. From this, it's clear that this isn't necessarily the right environment for her. The Lyn here is nothing like the badass I've been talking about up till now. Eliwood picks up on that too, and to his credit, helps her with it in their A support, helping her realise it's okay for her to be a kick-ass warrior and have pride in her background, even if she's not like the other ladies in court, and this acceptance of her is part of why they hook up later. Lyn and Eliwood do marry if they A support, in which case, Lyn probably does get the hang of acting as a noble would, eventually, especially given how eager to learn she is in their support, but you can see that it just isn't natural for her. This is something of an issue with Lyn hooking up with either of the boys. If she does, she ends up becoming a lady, for keeps, and potentially choosing a life she may not necessarily want to be with her spouse, which is realistic to a degree, compromise is a thing, and it's not like Eliwood and Hector wouldn't do everything in their power to help her settle in okay, and probably visit Sacae when she could. It also illustrates the value that Lyn places in family and being with those she loves, even above going back home. On the topic of Lyn's supports with the boys, they perfectly reflect Eliwood and Hector's paths during the story. Given that Eliwood's personal trial is about him staying true to himself, it's fitting that his support with Lyn shows him helping her do the same. In the same way, Hector's personal struggle involves him accepting his weaknesses and understanding that they needn't make him a burden, which is exactly what he teaches Lyn. I alluded to how well Lyn fits Eliwood and Hector's bromance personality-wise, but it's not just on a personality level, but also a narrative one, and even philosophical if you want to go there. Sadly, narrative compatibility can only get you so far, and the potential issue remains. Now, let's consider the endings where Lyn packs up and heads back to Sacae. Lyn loves her home in the plains more than almost anything, which begs the question, should she stay, or should she go? Who she does go back with doesn't really matter, as her supports and relationships with Florina, Kent and Wrath are all solid. Her default conversation with Eliwood, before the battle preparations level near the end of the game, makes it very clear where her mind space is. I mean, I wouldn't hesitate about anything concerning my grandfather's health. In fact, I'd be happy to do anything I could. I thought I was all alone in the world, and now that I've found my family, I don't want to lose him. I know what you mean. I can't bear to think of losing my mother. If I survive all of this, I want to be at my mother's side, to do anything she asks. Nothing is more important than family. Yet, in my heart, the plains still call me. The never-ending oceans of grass. The memory of that scent alone is enough to leave me weak. After all said and done in these scenarios, Lyn ultimately realises that even though she's found a place with her friends and subjects, where she really belongs is where she started. Like Florina says in their support, living on the plains just seems right for her. The common folk of Caelin do come to like Lyn, and Lyn seems to like them back, but ultimately she knows that a ruler just isn't her. She's not like Eliwood, a natural-born ruler, and she's not like Hector, whose only choice was to grow into his position. In her heart, Lyn is a girl of the plains, but here, she's not the lady. Ignoring which ending is quote-unquote better for her, it's staggering how varied Lynn's endings are, ranging from being in a position of power in 2 locations to retiring to a life of solitude in the country, with or without her bestie or a squeeze. Compare that to the boys, who will always go back to their homelands and ascend to the throne, marriage being the only variable. I imagine the writers had Lynn's absence from FE6 in mind, and took it as carte blanche regarding her direction. Resultantly, after Corin, Lynn's the lord with the most player-influenced life path in the series. I enjoy how the writers used the blank check they got from Lynn's absence in FE6 and the framework of FE7's character endings to allow the player to help shape Lynn's future and flavour of coming of age based on their perception of her, as which of Lynn's double lives she chooses to remain in after the game is based on which of her personal relationships the player wants to emphasise. Emphasising her relationships with her commoner friends and love interest from Lynn mode, or foregoing her relationships entirely, will cause Lynn to double down on her resolve to return to the plains, renounce her ladyship, and go back to psyche, while emphasising her new relationships with the nobles Eliwood and Hector will cause her to realise the promise of her new life and embrace her role as a lady. Lynn's personal dilemma lends her character a strange freedom, being able to end her story wherever and with whoever her heart leads her. Not to say she's got it made, mind you. To be torn between obligation and desire is quite the fix, especially when that obligation is marred by strife. Lynn faces animosity from those that don't understand her, and even those that should on multiple fronts. Going back to Eliwood, she herself expresses surprise at how accepting of her, a noble such as he is during Kerr mode. And if she does marry him, the game literally says that it sets all of Lycia in uproar, but Lynn just has to weather it. Which she does. Again, Lynn does as her heart commands, which is compounded by her path being almost purely personal. The save the land element is just a backdrop. With that perspective, while an understandable criticism, her more subtle involvement in Eliwood and Hector mode makes narrative sense. And, mildly spicy take, I think that at least conceptually, she's a perfect fit for the kind of story Blazing Blade is trying to tell. And it's precisely because, well, she doesn't fit. Let's break it down. Lynn embodies the attitude behind Blazing Blade's character-driven narrative. Sure, she grows and commands a small army, fights a corrupt noble, saves her land, and then helps save the continent from an evil wizard and some feral dragons, but all that belies Lynn's more personal goals of revenge, family, and belonging. Lynn's stake in the plot is uniquely intimate and personal for a Fire Emblem protagonist. That's the crux of why I think she's a perfect fit for Blazing Blade. The intimacy in her character brings her down to my level, and provides a strong counterbalance to the more overt Save the World mission and duties and responsibilities that hang over Eliwood and Hector's heads, reinforcing Blazing Blade's small-scale narrative. Lynn's a girl who, like many of us, was looking for something to latch onto in life, which is part of why I call her lost. First the rest of her tribe, and then revenge, and then the family and friends that she comes to surround herself with. While she does have a strong will and sense of justice, everything she accomplishes is almost just a roadblock. Slightly weird take, but hear me out. The character arcs of FE7's lords form a Freudian trio. The Freudian trio is inspired by Freud's personality theory, which posits that the human psyche is comprised of 3 layers that deal with different concepts, with the id dealing with the most basic human desires, the ego dealing with one's consciousness and rationale, and the superego dealing with one's morality. A trio of protagonists fulfilling these roles personality-wise isn't exactly unheard of, but in the context of Fire Emblem, following a trio of lords with their own variably scaled character arcs in their stories lets FE7 display a variety of human struggles through its protagonists, which is part of what makes it so emotionally engaging. Lynn's integral to that. In this paradigm, Lynn's character arc acts as the id, Hector's the ego, and Eliwood's the superego, as Lynn's is based primarily around herself and satisfying her emotional state and needs, through the protection of others, but still. Hector's is based around bettering himself for his country and friends, and carries implications for him, Ostia, and Binding Blade, and Eliwood's shows him reaffirming his moral values, and is obviously central to the game's plot. Interestingly, as far as their personalities go, I'd probably consider Hector more of an id, and Lynn more of the ego, so subversion, I guess? Driving the point home. Contrary to most lords, Lynn doesn't have some kind of divine birthright or duty or something. She doesn't even get a proper legendary weapon. The Manikati is debatable, and Athos makes damn sure we know the Soulcati doesn't count. Yeah, thanks for nothing, old-timer. That's ordered some booty milk. While nobility by birth, Lynn's background and attitude paint her as more of a homegrown hero. even bleeding out into her design, with its Mermaid-inspired outfit and relatively humble foreign aesthetic compared to Eliwood and Hector's more highbrow clothing. I've heard people say that Lyn shouldn't be a lord or even exist because of her perceived irrelevance, and I get where they're coming from, but on top of disagreeing with that for everything I've stated before, really look at everything Lyn goes through here. Her idyllic life being ripped away with the murder of her parents, being abandoned by her people, the revelation of her heritage, and journeying across the land to save both her newly introduced grandpa and the land she's essentially just inherited, learning how to play a role she never knew was hers, that she doesn't even want, to help her grandfather and placate the people of Caelin, all the while dealing with the burgeoning feelings of vengeance bubbling up inside. Lyn shoulders all this burden and still puts everything on the line, goes on these distant travels to help her friends rise to the challenge, ultimately succeeding and either settling down as a lady with her new love or heading back home with her new powers and a potential partner. Like I said at the start, Lyn gives her all for her loved ones, and this quality leads her to basically have her own hero's journey through what I've described. With this, combined with everything I've said up till now, I believe Lyn is more than worthy of her role within the game. I guess it depends on how you flip the pancake. Full disclosure, I started work on this last summer, and it has been a ride to say the least, but it's worth it, because all that time has let me really consider this, while also absorbing everything Lyn has to offer as a character, and it dawned on me. There is so much to appreciate and even admire about her. While not pivotal to the Elebian narrative in the same way the boys are, I truly believe Blazing Blade would be missing something special if it didn't have Lyn as a protagonist. While she's nobility and he's not, Lyn feels just as grounded and relatable to me as someone like Ike. Her struggles with feelings of vengeance and being a young woman in a strange world that pressures and beats her down is remarkably humanizing, while her persistent care for others in spite of that, her emotional openness and refusal to quit or supplicate is laudable, especially in Lyn mode. Sidebar, I find Lyn mode rather undervalued. Handholdy tutorial aside, it's tightly written, delivering strong themes of revenge, family and prejudice, and its position at the beginning of the game sears Blazing Blade's personal feel into the player's mind from the jump, and personally, it did a fantastic job of putting me on Lyn's side right from the beginning. It mostly suffers because it's obviously written with its tutorial in mind. If it were valued by the plot in the same way as Eliwood and Hector mode, I don't think Lyn's supposed irrelevance would be that much of an issue, because frankly, Hector's not up to all that much in Eliwood mode himself. But it works, both because Hector mode has the same beats from his perspective, but also because we have that prior familiarity with Hector from Binding Blade. Regardless, Lyn's full of charm and visceral appeal, while also having an admirable personality and well-defined character built on a unique conflict and relatable themes. At this point, if you genuinely still think that all Lyn has to offer are her legs, I honestly don't know what to tell you. I haven't gone too in on the whole waifu thing, because frankly, I don't think she needs all that. Even the nostalgia factor her value is often boiled down to means nothing to me. I have no nostalgia for her. I only started playing Fire Emblem in April 2016, and Blazing Blade wasn't my first game, or my second, or my third, and yet, I see her as one of the series' more charming, unique, and well-rounded protagonists. She's not just baby's first waifu. Life's like a box of chocolates, but I can only imagine how bitter it is when your whole life is ripped away and transplanted like Lyn's, finding yourself in a world where many won't accept you for your background or literally what's in your blood, and at the same time, dealing with the demons from your past so you can walk into the future. That can't be easy and must be lonely, but Lyn shows us that if you can find the strength to keep your heart open to the world and the people in it no matter what, you might just find some ride or die friends and a place to call home. She might have been lost when we met her, but Lyn's found her way into the hearts of players worldwide, and I have no problem calling her one of my favourite characters in the series, and saying for my money, she's well deserving of being both a lord and the First Lady of Western Fire Emblem.